Welcome to GraphiteHub's interview series. Today we're kicking this off with a multi-part mini-series focused entirely on graphite recycling. Graphite is the single largest mineral component in every lithium-ion battery, yet for too long it's been left out of the conversation. Over the next few episodes, we're going to unpack this space in more detail, and there's nobody better to join me than Dr. Luke Sweeney, Senior Cost and Recycling Analyst at Fastmarkets. Welcome, Luke.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
Perfect. Well, Luke, you're right at the heart of the graphite recycling space, with both a strong technical background and a clear sense of where this industry is heading. So to start off with, could you just give us a brief overview of your background and how you came to focus on this part of the battery supply chain?
So, as with most careers, my career hasn't been linear. I think one of the worst things you can do is actually try and plan your career because it never goes according to plan.
Yeah.
I did a master's in chemistry at UEA. I loved UEA. And then after that, I was like, I'm never, ever doing chemistry ever again. Never going to do it again. So I went to work in finance for a year. I didn't really enjoy it that much. And after working in finance for a year, I went straight back to chemistry, which was pretty funny.
Yeah.
And so then I was in Birmingham. So I moved for my job to work in finance in Birmingham. And then I was thinking, well, what else? I don't want to work. I've realized I don't want to work here. Yeah. And I was like, what do I do? What do I do with my job? So I was looking around, and I really, really just enjoyed batteries. Yeah. I always enjoyed batteries. And that's just, I've been very lucky in that I just happened to enjoy the electrochemistry side of chemistry. So I applied for a PhD. I sent someone off. It was someone complete I've never heard of. Just sent it off. Just said, here's my CV, here's my cover letter. I like batteries. I'll do anything battery related. Yeah. And they said, we've got a PhD in battery recycling. Would you like to do that?
Yeah.
And then so that's how I did my PhD in battery recycling. Within my PhD, I focused on graphite recycling. And again, that was just complete coincidence. Yeah. We were just looking at... The reason why we focused on graphite recycling is because if it's high value, like cobalt and nickel and lithium, you can kind of rely on industry to research it. Yeah. But graphite wasn't commonly recycled. It's quite low value, and it makes up quite a large percentage of the battery. So industry they weren't really... They needed to look at it, but they weren't particularly happy about looking at it, and they were, it wasn't really on the top of everyone's minds. So so that I did my PhD in graphite recycling, so I became a battery recycling graphite guy. Yeah, and that's how I got the technical expertise. And then in the middle of my PhD, I did a consulting role at Benchmark Minerals, and that's where we looked at battery recycling. We looked at helping build their battery recycling products. So that's how I got the experience in the kind of price reporting agency area. Yeah. And then after my PhD, I did a postdoc, semi-postdoctoral research role where we had some really interesting results, and then we and then after that, I worked at Fastmarkets. I got a job at Fastmarkets. Yeah. So again, and before then, I planned my career out. I had this all big plan and what was going to happen, and it all went haywire. But I'm really glad I did it. Yeah. And some of the best things you can do is just not to plan your career sometimes.
Just see where it takes you.
Yeah, right? It's really tough. It's a really tough thing to do. So that's how I got into battery recycling, and that's how I work at Fastmarkets.
Fantastic. And now we're here talking about graphite.
Yeah, now we're talking about graphite, which is super exciting.
Love it. Well, yeah, no, it definitely sounds like you're quite an expert when it comes to graphite recycling, so we're quite looking forward to getting into this in a bit more detail. So let's kick this off, but maybe to set the scene, the one thing investors struggle to understand is just how common graphite is out there. But maybe based on your expertise, would you mind maybe jumping into a bit of detail around what makes battery grade anode material battery grade?
Okay, so this is the really funny thing about graphite and graphite recycling, because graphite graphite is carbon, right? Yep. It's just carbon, and people think, oh yeah, graphite. People keep saying to me all the time, graphite is graphite. Yep. And I've been actually at conferences where I've had academics come up to me and they say, oh, it's just graphite. I just and these are academics. These are people with PhDs, in chemistry, or some like material processing PhD, and they're saying, oh yeah, just put it back into a battery, it's fine. And a lot of people don't realize that the graphite you have in your pencils is really different to the graphite you have in your batteries. So what makes electrochemical grade graphite so special is the first thing is it's super pure, and I'm talking really, really pure. The good quality stuff will be exceptionally pure. It'll have like no copper contamination.
Yeah.
It will be basically like 99.99599% carbon. It'll be super pure. And as much as people talk about how, like, science is very modern, science, we can do crazy stuff in science, but it's still really difficult to get that pure. And we can get it, but it's just really, really difficult.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing. The second thing is that it's sphericalized. So graphite isn't, so you can have crystalline graphite and you can have polycrystalline graphite. Battery grade graphite is polycrystalline because you can shape it. So there's a thing without getting too technical, you want to make sure it's sphericalized because you want to make sure that's how you have enough surface area to allow the lithium to intercalate in and deintercalate out.
Okay.
And so you want it to be sphericalized. But also, if you sphericalize it too small, then you can like pack it too densely and your electrode isn't conductive enough. Or your electrode has like resistance problems, electronic resistance problems. But if you pack it too loose, if you make the particles too big, you'll pack it very loosely. And then suddenly your electrode isn't dense enough. There's not that enough material on your electrode to actually get that range you want. So it has to be a perfect size and it has to be sphericalized. In addition to that, it also has to be pitch coated, because graphite has this thing called first cycle loss, where when you cycle it reduces, it forms this protective layer, but then that depletes some of the electrolytes. So it also has to be very optimized in terms of this in this like surface layer, which is very thin, and so it's actually very difficult to get, and it's just, you can't just get old graphite and put it into a new one. This is a technical product, and it has people with scientists developing it, optimizing it, and each graphite from each supplier. Let's say I'm making Luke's battery company, and I want to make batteries, right? And I get graphite from 4 different suppliers. Let's say if I use natural graphite from 4 different suppliers, these natural graphites will be mined in different areas. So the fact that they're mined in different areas will mean that these different graphites would have different residue contaminants in them, and they might have slightly different shapes. And that also adds so much complications, because every time you get a new supplier, you need to optimize your graphite. And you need to qualify it just to make sure it works in your electrochemical process. So it's a whole world out there, right?
Yeah, it's not as easy as just taking it out of the ground and putting it in a battery, right?
Yeah.
If it was that easy, everyone would be doing it, and we probably wouldn't be sitting here today, because it wouldn't be such an issue that we're seeing now, especially geopolitically, with China dominating the space.
Exactly. And actually, sorry, I forgot to say, one of the most important things about graphite in terms of its properties, or in terms of graphite generally as its properties, is the fact that it's not everywhere, but it's relatively abundant. Well, it's very abundant. And it's also, very cheap to make. Yeah. So that's also one of the because people don't want to spend a lot of money for their batteries, right? You want to have, if you're a battery manufacturer, you want to like make it as cheap as possible to manufacture. So
exactly.
And that's why graphite's really handy.
Yeah. So we understand that graphite, is the largest mineral component that goes into an electric vehicle battery, but for too long it's been left out of the recycling conversation. Why do you think that's the case?
Oh, I think it's exactly that, because people say, it's just graphite, it's graphite. Yeah. And to be fair, people are trying to recycle. When you recycle things, you're going to recycle the high value things first. You want to make sure, you need to make sure you get the cobalt out, you get the lithium out. And there's loads of concerns over like the cobalt supply chain. So people definitely don't want to keep buying, primary cobalt. So you definitely want to get the cobalt out. And so it's understandable, it's not the most expensive thing in the battery, in the cell. Yeah. So you can understand them for that, which is fair enough. But I think the problem also lies in the fact that it's actually, we don't know. Well, we don't really know how. In the West, we don't really know how, because unlike the cathode, so you have the cathode material, which is also a solid particle. You've got a solid particle. The cathode, you have a solid particle in the cathode, solid particle in the anode, 2 solid particles. The cathode one you can just redissolve and then turn into crystals and just remanufacture it completely from the ground up. But unlike the cathode, graphite doesn't really dissolve. Well, it does in like a HF, or you can. It's like graphite is very unusual. You can't just recrystallize graphite without. Maybe you can get a physicist to do it using enormous amounts of energy. But that's not how you make graphite profitably. So you can't actually just dissolve it and like recrystallize it. What you have to do is, a lot of the aging mechanisms are morphology. And there was a lot of things in academia. There was a lot of papers in academia where they talked about, the like aging mechanisms crystalline? Is the aging mechanisms morphology? And there was also back and forth within academia. So another aspect was the fact that we weren't even sure what the aging mechanisms were, because for my research, when I looked into the aging mechanisms of graphite, I was finding it was nothing to do with crystallinity. The crystallinity was fine. It was actually morphology.
Yeah.
And so there's been a lot of red herrings in terms of academia and also in terms of where industry are initially looking. Now we've kind of realized it's morphology based. So it's very difficult to recycle basically. And
So in the West, recycling doesn't play a big part at the moment, but where does the market sit in China when it comes to recycling graphite? Is the market there, or is graphite just so cheap, recycling doesn't play a part?
So China is really cool. Just for the listeners, China are the pros when it comes to recycling. A lot of people think that China, it's they do things very cheaply and there's not a lot of like technical expertise. No. China are the pros when it comes to manufacturing and when it comes to recycling. And a lot of people in the West, it's really funny. A lot of people in the West are really surprised by this. They're like, wow, China is so good at recycling. But it turns out China have been recycling our waste for 30 years, 40 years. And I don't know why people are so surprised about it. They're like, wow, they've been recycling our waste for 30 or 40 years. And suddenly they're really good at recycling it. And it's not the fact that they have better technological fundamentals than we do. It's just the fact that let's say if I had 500 million pounds or euros or whatever, and I wanted to build a battery recycling plant in the UK, I find it really difficult to get the staff. But in China, I could fill a room with engineers, no problem. Who all know how to build a battery recycling plant. So they're pros at it. So. And this is the scary thing, actually. So China, they're the pros of battery recycling. But the scary thing is that even they struggle to recycle graphite.
Okay.
And it's like, wait a minute, if China's struggling, then actually, how are we going to find it? But this is an important aspect as well. There's a bit of a chicken and egg scenario. The reason why China has so much recycling industry, particularly in the battery space, is because China make lots of batteries. So, and for the listeners, when you have a gigafactory is first set up, you often produce a lot of scrap waste, and that's just because making batteries is really hard. You sometimes make mistakes, and that's totally fine. This is part of a normal manufacturing process. And when you've got this scrap, you need someone to offtake it. So then, if I set up a recycling company, I've got this reliable source of scrap from a gigafactory that I can build technical expertise. And when the end of life supply from consumers is a bit hit and miss sometimes, I can then rely on a consistent supply of material coming from my gigafactory. Because even when gigafactories are optimized, they still produce scrap. Things still go wrong. So that's why in China there's so much recycling. And that's why but even there's so much recycling, even they're finding it difficult to recycle. And the problem is the cost. It's all about the cost of graphite, which is so difficult to recycle. Because primary graphite is so cheap.
And I guess we've seen the export restrictions in China on exporting graphite back in 2023, and more recently the tariffs in the US that are taking the price of importing graphite into the US up to, it's adding on about 160%, I think, now. So do you think that's going to create a push towards recycling graphite in the West? How do you see that kind of playing out?
I think the West need first of all, actually, this from a geopolitical perspective, China produces all of our electrochemical grade graphite.
It's like 98 or 99%.
It's ridiculous how high it is. It's ridiculous.
How have we gotten here, right?
It's just nuts. And so it's important that it's really weird to think that we're trying to electrify, right? We're trying to electrify to decarbonize. But if China wanted to, I mean, it would be very crazy if they did, because they would also lose lots of money too. But if they wanted to, they could just say, we're not going to export any graphite to anyone. Then no one will be able to make any cells. Or they could say, we're not going to export any batteries to anyone. And then suddenly all of our decarbonization plans will just go, down the drain. So that's kind of crazy. And we don't have we don't have the capacity to make it ourselves. So that's why we should have a recycling industry within Europe and also within America as well. Where any large consumer of batteries should have some sort of recycling industry.
Because how can you rely on one country for a material that plays such a critical part?
Exactly, and especially with we've seen Europe is actually buddying up a bit with China a bit more. Well, certainly more than the US is. I think Europe is slowly realizing that actually they need to cooperate with China. But anyway, sorry. You've answered me a question. I have completely gone off the rails.
It's great flow.
No, it was about the tariffs.
If that's going to create a push towards recycling more.
So I think the problem if I'm a Western company and I'm trying to build a recycling infrastructure, and I'm trying to like make a business case for recycling graphite, often when you just run the numbers through, like virgin or new graphite material is just so cheap.
Yeah.
And I'm just thinking, I can't. And also, if the Chinese can't recycle it, we can't make money recycling it, then how on earth can we make money how on earth can we make money recycling it?
So do you think as graphite prices start to potentially improve, that might create more of an incentive for graphite recycling?
I think that would definitely, if graphite prices go up, that would definitely create an incentive to recycle graphite. But also, that's how these tariffs would help, because if there was a tariff on graphite imports, and I'm trying to build a gigafactory, assuming that these tariffs suddenly made it like economically feasible to either mine graphite in the US or recycle graphite in the US, then that could kind of be a potential breakthrough in terms of giving industry the ability to build up. Because the problem is that it's not like we're all electrifying at the same time. We're trying to play catch up with China, and China is kind of like maybe, if we're having we're on a sprint, we've just started, and China has basically almost finished the race. So I don't know how we're gonna.
Yeah.
So
it's definitely a tough road ahead.
It's definitely a tough road ahead, and that's because China, like 10, 15 years ago, they said we're gonna do batteries, whilst we were very happy making cars. Yeah. So we made cars, and China lost a lot of money. Chinese companies, they struggled for a while. Yeah. They did a lot of R&D, and now they're they kind of they thought
monopoly.
they did the long game, and now they're reaping the rewards for it. So we definitely need some sort of because it might be tariffs, it might be like kind of state support for these companies, but it's tough. It's tough.
Great, thanks Luke for that. Thanks everyone for tuning into part 1 of this episode of Graphite Recycling. Join us in our next episode, where we'll jump into the science behind it and how it actually works. We'll see you next time.